pray, think, ask questions, and don't let the hearsay and the myths drag you down. In Australia in particular, now there's homeschooling is on the rise, and there's a lot more people doing it. I think that there is no excuse to say that not being around other kids is going to hurt them.
Rod, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Cody. Thanks for having me, mate.
No worries, my pleasure. As we start this conversation, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I hate talking about myself, but okay. Well, we've been homeschooling for 12 years. We have 5 kids, been married for over 20. I started out as a store manager at Kura on books in my local area, and that was a bit of a miracle in and of itself. I shifted careers after 12 years and did a degree at Tabor with ministry and theology. Now I'm sort of working on freelance stuff and working and exploring the gifts I have, I guess, in that area. And not to big note myself or anything. I'm sort of learning as I go. So yeah, but anyway, I come from a broken home, pretty severely broken home. I've shared about that quite a bit, so I won't ramble on. But it's a pretty sad story. Welfare dependency, the whole shebang, and a lot of that influences our topic today, I guess, homeschooling, and how we raise our kids in light of the curse, I guess you could say, curse of government dependency and the welfare cycle. We come from a low socioeconomic area ourselves, so we are certainly not in the high end when it comes to homeschooling and resources and all that kind of stuff. So we've had to pioneer in many respects from the ground up. That has included budgeting like crazy and being meticulous with every cent and making sure that we can do what we do. I originally was against homeschooling, and that took me about 3 years, a long time, but it took me 3 years to come around to the idea. And that was sort of triggered by some events at the local school that my daughter was attending, and daughters were attending at the time. I've spoken about that before, it kind of hit me hard when I saw that the failing of the system. I mean, the system was there for me, and it was a stable environment that I needed, and it was pretty much the only one that I had at that time. And I sort of felt attached to it for that reason, and kept telling myself that, this is good. It's good for them. It's good that they be part of that. But they don't come from a broken home the way I did, and they have a loving family. It's Christ-centered, and So yeah, long story short, I believe that God put that in our path, and especially in mind to challenge us to trust in Him a lot more, and to raise our kids in the way they should go. And so we stepped into this direction and headed in. That was like 11 years ago, 12 years ago now. And despite my trepidation and I wouldn't say fear, but concern about socialization, because that's all you hear. The myth of socialization is out there pretty bad. It's it's sort of thrown at you pretty heavily. Until I kind of overcame that I would call it peer pressure, really. This mass sort of psychosis that can't homeschool our kids, we can't educate our own kids. Parents are hopeless at doing it. We need professionals. When really, as I've learnt through the process of homeschooling, that educating kids begins in the home, and the teachers have a role to play. They're never surrogate parents, and I think that the system we have today is this idea that you pave off your kids to a system, and that they become, in some ways, a way of parenting your children. And that kind of hit hard too for me when I had an encounter with a doctor once, and he was anti-homeschool, very anti-homeschool, and very much on the socialization hive mind kind of mentality. And I it wasn't a pretty situation. It was a bad thing, um, and I was challenged to really think about why I homeschool at that point in time, and um, I think that really gave me a basis for defending homeschool. I wasn't really like, hey, well, I know people are against it, but just chill. I thought we're sort of exchanging ideas here, and then no, he was adamant that it was an evil beyond description, and sort of went his way, and I went mine. But it should have opened my eyes up to the kind of hostile responses and I guess the treatment that homeschoolers get from time to time. They're treated as weirdos and freaks. And I think there might be a fringe element that justifies some of that, but I don't think as in general it's helpful. I think it's actually quite harmful because these parents are stepping out and loving their kids, often sacrificing their own careers, taking I wouldn't say risks, but I'd say taking a different road than the one that's traveled by many, especially when they're making sacrifices as far as finances are concerned and other stuff like that. I think the encounter with that doctor, it angered me to the point where I thought, well, there needs to be more understanding, I think, in Australia about what homeschooling means. And when you've got a professional who just attacks you in a space or an environment where you're there to actually get a checkup or totally unrelated, you're there for unrelated reasons, and then suddenly there's this massive confrontation. You're like, oh, okay, how do I respond to that? It was a difficult situation that, like I said, it opened my eyes up to the kind of, I don't know if the right word's hate, maybe misunderstanding about what homeschooling means and what it takes to do the job and that kind of thing. He was adamant, back to the socialization thing, and how that fits in. He was adamant that as kids, their peers should help raise them. And he was one of these big sort of points. And I went to him after that, and I thought, my wife after that, sorry. And I said, I think that's nuts. I grew up in an environment where, 13 years old, I was making adult decisions. Right from at the time my parents told me they were divorcing, right there at the kitchen table, who are we going to live with? I was in the morning, and that was a traumatic experience for me. I was making adult decisions from that point on. And my peers were raising me. And you know where that landed? Substance abuse. Being out all night in the streets. Lounge surfing. This medical professional to tell me that my peers or my kids' peers need to help raise them, I think was abhorrent. And in fact, I would even consider that to be child abuse, because it's abandonment for parents to say, well, kids can go and do what they want. Well, I've seen that. I've reaped the consequences of that. I've seen how that affects other people. And okay, we talk about independence, talk about freedom, and kids need this and that. Well, it can be done in a loving environment where kids are nurtured into that, rather than just dumped and, hey, learn how to swim, make adult decisions, and be done with it. And that's why I think homeschooling's the way to go. If you can, of course, there are many parents who can't do this as much as they might want to. They don't have the stability at home. They don't have the framework. That doesn't mean that they couldn't get to that stage. They couldn't raise themselves up or ask to be helped into that sort of position. Maybe it might require a little bit of education for themselves. They might not have their HSC, and they might be able to go and do that at TAFE or something like that, and better prepare them for taking on their child's education. So to be real, there are situations where homeschooling just would not work, and it'd actually be more harmful to a child than it would be helpful. So I'm all about like, hey, find the balance here. Okay, I agree, but socialization is not the reason we should be using to say, well, homeschooling sucks. It's bad because my kids are socialized. I think if we could do more, we would. But again, you only have two hands and there's only a certain amount of time in the day. And we cover all the topics. We do what we can to meet the Australian curriculum and stuff like that. But that's my story basically, mate. And that's some of the encounters I've had as far as homeschooling goes. And it's why I've kind of stuck my heels in a bit when it comes to homeschooling. No, I never really expected to be someone who'd be somewhat of a spokesman for homeschoolers. But, here I am.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's one of the things I was going to ask you about was the whole, objections to homeschooling. I was homeschooled, and you have this kind of common set of objections that you do encounter. Would you say socialization is one of the most common of those?
I think it's the most prevailing, mate. It's a hive mind kind of thing, like COVID, I guess. The fear of COVID, it's the same thing. Fear of homeschooling is that, my kids are not going to be emotionally mature enough, and they're not going to be able to survive. I mean, it doesn't matter. Big Bang Theory, if you're familiar with the TV series, classic example. Of course, it's an exaggeration, but hey, there are kids who go to the system and put through the system and come out of that system who have social anxiety issues. They have social disorders. I mean, come on. Let's move on from that point. It's been negated. It's been proven to be wrong. So, socialization, I don't think, is a legitimate argument when it comes to saying we shouldn't homeschool. I think that there are, in Australia in particular, now there's homeschooling is on the rise, and there's a lot more people doing it. I think that there is no excuse to say that that being around other kids is or not being around other kids is going to hurt them. I think that they need to be around some peers. They need to have friends. And there are all sorts of options for homeschoolers out there, such as co-op groups, the youth groups. If you're Christians, you're attending church. There's far more opportunity, I think, for kids in that aspect to be around people who are not their own age, and to learn from older people as much as from the younger people. And if there's any kind of village, as Hillary Clinton might say, they've got to raise them through a village. Well, she's not the best person to take advice from anyway. But the point is, she said it. And hey, just to quote from someone who would probably be against homeschooling, I think, we can say that again. What that doctor said to me, that medical professional, that homeschooling is of the devil, basically. Kids need to be raised by their friends. I mean, man, where I come from, no way. I'd rather have them have a situation where they are nurtured into, as I said, society, rather than just dumped and said, look, fend for yourself. You're the government's problem now, which is what my parents told me when I finished my HSC. No. Yeah. I think that homeschooling, the strengths of homeschooling are that the opportunities to raise kids who are well-balanced, well-grounded, and who have this ability to interact with people, not just their own age, and they're not kind of boxed into this class system. You're a millennial and you're a Gen X, and you're not boxed into this class category that, well, you're more atheist and and these guys are more Christian, and that's a good thing and it's a bad thing. Hey, are we about equality in this country? Are we about having a fair go, or are we going to keep boxing these kids into this systematic class structure that says that they've got to operate at a certain basis, otherwise they're outside of that? So the paradox of fit in but stand out. I think homeschoolers escape that in many respects. I mean, there are downsides, as I pointed out. Some people can't homeschool. That's the way it goes. And yes, homeschooling can be taxing. There are sacrifices involved. But all those have reasonable answers, and all those can be answered with the right kind of help,
Mm.
especially the socialization question.
Mm.
And it's a fair question to some degree, but the myth that's attached to it and the straw man that's added onto it, nah.
Yeah, I guess it's a case of trying to use an extreme situation or potential extreme situations to debunk an entire way of doing schooling that is really, really, as you point out, quite a helpful and valuable way of doing it.
Generalizations rarely serve any kind of logical argument or reason sort of, hey, well, what are the reasons why I shouldn't be homeschooling? I mean, it doesn't help that the government disincentivizes homeschooling. I mean, you've got to register if you want to get the family tax benefit. Many families don't register for that reason. They don't need it, or I mean, the amount of taxes that we're charged, it's very hard to not be on that. I actually like the idea of having that transparency. So you have the Board of Studies come around, and they're told to be objective. So in New South Wales, anyway, they're told to be objective. And if you get a good ex-teacher who is on the Board of Studies, who is your rep, NESA rep for that particular area, you're doing really well, and they'll be helpful as far as all that red tape goes. And I quite enjoy the kids getting their completion certificates and things like that when they hit year 10. I think that's a sign to them that they've hit the mark in more ways than one. Not that I think that marking kids is necessarily a good thing, and testing them in pressure environments, and expecting to see them perform well. I think that there's more tests out there, testing kind of situations you can do out there that helps measure their capabilities and abilities.
Yeah. No, that's really good. You started touching on it a little bit, but even on the point of socialization, there are a lot of benefits from homeschooling, contrary to popular belief. What would you say are the most common benefits or the best benefits in your experience from homeschooling?
From what I've seen, the best benefit is shared education, opportunity. I mean, anything is a learning experience. Anything is a lesson. We might be doing a routine sort of assignment or routine bookwork, and then we'll get an email from the local theatre. It's called the Glass House, and they put on all sorts of different performances, and then we'll get an email. Oh, there's this performance coming up of Shakespeare. And, well, we've just been doing Hamlet. Oh, wow, they're doing Hamlet through Bell Shakespeare. Let's go see that. And you can fit that in. Not as so easy to do when you're 9 to 5 or 9 to 3 trying to fit, the whole, I call it conveyor belt industrialized education complex into your day, into your life. I think with the internet as well, it makes it easier to homeschool. So there's an added advantage there if you know where to go, what to look for. And I mean, Wikipedia is not the best. It's not a bad starting place, but that's kind of not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about finding primary resources and primary documents that you can actually put in front of the kids and stuff. That's much easier to access those now than it ever has been. Archive.org, for example, would be a good resource where you can straight away, you've got a library at your fingertips, and these are biographies, autobiographies, you name it. So that even keeps the cost down because archive.org is free. They just require some donations now and then when they ask. So that in itself would be one of the primary resources that you can use in that regard. And that, I think, is part of the whole thing of why I think homeschooling is great and why I think the benefits of homeschooling are that you have an access to resources that you probably wouldn't get access to in school. Not only that, and I have a real beef with the idea that kids can function with minimal supervision for over an hour a day, recess and lunch. I mean, I was in the playground. I saw how things went. You're measured and cut by your peers, and you've got the cool kids that look at any American television show, Jump 21, for example, the 80s, 90s television show with Johnny Depp in it. You can see there's all these structures that exist, and they're all created by kids. And so, we're telling our children to fit into that. Well, it's going to build character. I don't think so, man. Didn't do it for me. Just made me angry. And when I left school, I thought, okay, well, I might have been in year 11 because I played music. I might have been like a little bit more cool than some, but as soon as school finished, that coolness is gone. Unless you want to live out your high school years vicariously through social media, which a lot of people do. Facebook is just one of those extensions of high school. Everyone who's popular in high school has the 200, 300 friends where you've got like 2 or 3. That's okay with me. At least those 2 or 3 are probably more solid and there's more substance in those relationships than that 300-400 that so-and-so's got. So again, we come back to the socialization thing, social media, the whole shebang. Like, we don't let our kids use social media until they're 18. Once their HSC is done, no worries. And then, so that's part of nurturing him into that process. I mean, even our electronic devices are limited to the education process. We do have games and we do other things, but I think that it's irresponsible to give such a powerful tool like technology into the hands of a 10 or 12-year-old, expect them to not be influenced by the garbage that you find on there, such as you would see on TikTok. Even Instagram's got some crap. And you go, oh, well, no, we police it. Even we, with our limits on technology, we've had a few close calls and a few problems ourselves. So even though we allow a little bit of freedom in that use of technology, as I've said before in a couple of articles at Dads for Kids, technology is a tool, not a toy. Yep. And I refer to that with my kids all the time. Remember, this is a tool, not a toy. It's a way of communicating. It's not a way of entertaining yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, that technology point that you raised is really interesting because I had a similar experience, similar upbringing, in very low tech household, and that's something that I could have grown to resent, but I've actually looked back on, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And it's pretty radical in the world that we live in. But just this past weekend, we were at a big conference. It was a full afternoon, evening conference, and one of the speakers was blown away because this family, our family and a couple of other families who had sort of low tech, still don't have iPhones, all of the kids, they sat through the whole conference. They just had attention spans that were normal. But I guess it's pretty radical to most people having that kind of a tech or low tech upbringing.
I consider it to be responsible parenting. I mean, it's countless articles online talking about internet use, responsible internet use and things like that. We have, the console, we have gaming online and stuff like that. We do Minecraft. I mean, Minecraft's probably the biggest one because of the educational value. That's huge. And I've written a few articles for Dads for Kids on that people can go look at, ideas on challenges they can give their kids and work with them. And you do that with them. And that's part of another benefit of homeschooling is that you, as Kierkegaard said, you learn as you teach, right? You're on this journey with them and you wonder at stuff and then invite them to come and wonder with you. And they learn from that. Like I got this vinyl collection from an HMV I inherited from my father, and it's probably the only thing I really ever got. But I got the Simon and Garfunkel collection, and I was just showing them the different types of musical instruments they used, and I'm getting them to try to listen and figure out which ones are being used. And then, the box is probably the coolest musical arrangement of theirs, I think. They've got a heap of good stuff, but the box is just amazing. The way they've done that, the structure, and then at the end, the boom and the snare that just hits really loud. It's an awesome song. And like, I'm just showing them this and I'm getting excited about it. And they're like, wow, this is the first time they've ever heard it. And like, this is amazing. So I'm introducing this stuff to them. And it's music appreciation. Well, that's just, I love this music and I don't know why. And having a bit of knowledge about music, I can help them develop beyond that. That's as simple as it gets. It's not complicated, I don't have a degree in music. I've got a degree in ministry and theology. But I do love music, and I've studied music for a very long time, really just self-taught, other than having a guitar teacher in my teens. I don't understand why more people don't homeschool, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, I guess, the parental side of things, and it feels like a really obvious question to ask, but for maybe people who aren't on board, how important is that parental involvement in kids' upbringing?
Well, I think it's huge, and that's just reflected on what we just talked about. The idea that peers are supposed to raise your kids, their friends are supposed to help raise them, that's nuts. You watch any teen movie, and we used to watch them like crazy when we were, I was in my teens. No, I wasn't a Christian, man. I became a Christian in 96, Christmas 96. I mean, I'd got to be nudging me for a while, but I lived pretty much like an atheist, man. I was in rebellion. There's no doubt about that. And we used to watch all the teen movies, and no matter what, R-rated, didn't matter. And you see these examples, I guess. And kids watch this stuff and they try to live it out. We did as teenagers. I mean, you can't, again, technology, right? We limit what kind of access they go to. It's not like censoring, so to speak. It's more like being responsible and saying, well, it's age appropriate for you to engage in this right now. And that's homeschooling in a nutshell. Even just limiting technology, or sitting down with them and playing Minecraft, or engaging with them in that journey. And that's fun too. I mean, what a cool family time cool family time can you have than as a family activity, playing board game? I mean, I'm not a big fan of board games, to be honest, but give me a console and a controller and I'm happy. But I mean, the kids love that. Like, they play board games more than me, and that's really their mum's influence, and that's great. I think that's awesome. But I mean, I like Risk, my favorite's probably Scotland Yard. But as long as I get to be Mr. X. I don't know if you've ever heard of Scotland Yard, but it's a great board game.
No, I haven't.
Recommend getting it, especially when your kids get older.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. That's another thing. Like, even Scotland Yard, like, those board games, you sit down and you play with them. It's a lesson in and of itself. You get to learn about the geography of London. You've got to go through subways. I mean, it's a very simple process, homeschooling, and these things are just. I mean, a lot of parents are probably doing this already, even though they're sending their kids to the rubber stamp yard, so they can get that rubber stamp. Yes, you're conforming to the ideals and ideology that's prevailing in society. Happy days. Now, what we do is counterculture, man, and I think a lot of my inspiration, I think, comes from a lot of the US guys over there who, and these guys aren't fringe nutcases. They're not, they're not wearing tinfoil hats. They're loving their kids the best way they can. And yeah, the majority of them are Christians, but they're real about it. There's no religious overexertion. There's no like, well, look at what I'm doing. I'm a Christian. Look how perfect I am now. There's roughness, there's rawness, but there's grace. And following the Lord's leading in that direction and saying, well, He's called us to this. As parents, we're to raise up our kids in the way they should go. And that requires discernment. That requires obedience to Him and His kingship. Not my sovereignty over myself, but submitting to His sovereignty over me and over my family as well.
That's awesome.
So as a Christian, I think that's a great benefit of homeschooling as well. That we can come together pretty much as church every morning and sit, study the Word of God, and worship together.
Yeah.
I think that
Amazing.
is special. I think that's unique. We can do communion, um, and it's not quirky. It's not weird. It's real. It's
Mm.
fellowship, life together, as Bonhoeffer might say. When he does, in fact, in his book.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Have you had any experience, and this is something that I experienced, but have you had any experience in terms of homeschooling transitioning to university and the challenges that might, with people or anything that might develop in that regard?
Are homeschoolers suitable for college? Absolutely, 100%. We do, our kids do their HSC through TAFE. Therefore, they're actually doing their year 11 and 12 through college. So they're already basically doing college work the way they would at university. And I've done a degree, so I know, through table. And I'm not just saying that, big note myself, but I'm just saying that I've had that experience, and I know what I'm seeing them do is exactly what I did,
Mm.
and that they're prepared for that. And there's other ways around it. They can get tertiary qualifications, which will surpass every tertiary qualification they get surpasses their HSC anyway.
Wow.
That's what people look at. Yes, you might have your HSC, but it's that tertiary qualification that'll get you through the door, not your TER. I mean, or ATAR, I think it is now. But your ATAR, then the obsession over it, I think, is just unhealthy for our society. It's unhealthy for our kids.
Mm.
Because you're also, with you look at the ATAR system, you're weighed down by your class, where you are. So if you come from a low socioeconomic area and your school is full of guys who, girls who just don't want to work because that's just the culture, they're not really intellectually driven, they're more hands-on, and they sit the HSC and you're like a smart kid, but you're stuck in this box, your ATAR is going to be low.
Mm.
Because you're ranked, it's not individual, it's collective. And that's socialism, man. That's Marxism.
Yeah.
Do we really want to keep giving our kids over to this and harming them in this way to some degree? I mean, they're putting this pressure on them to do things that are, I think, detrimental to their health, detrimental to their future, and detrimental to the family. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do the HSC. I mean, our kids do it, and our kids, we've got one doing it right now. She's almost ready to start it. But you see what NESA's done even recently with this. They've added more to the HSC. You don't just have to get your HSC now, but from year 10 up, you have to qualify a literacy and numeracy standards test. You have to pass that before you can actually qualify for your HSC. You would think, and I've raised this question with NASA, but no response, if someone's sitting their HSC and they get a good mark in their HSC, wouldn't that say to you that they have good numeracy and literacy skills?
Mm.
Doesn't make any sense why that NASA has added this standardized test on top of that so they can qualify. They're just more pressure for kids. I think, to be honest, they're just them creating more bureaucracy because they've, probably being a little unfair here, but their mates down the road who they shared the union membership with at university needs a job. So, hey, come on, we'll create a new department and here's a whole new section. Go ahead. That's cynicism for sure. But hey, with COVID-19, mate, I mean, come on. We have every right to be cynical of bureaucrats and their agenda and what they do behind the scenes and who those decisions and policies come along benefit. So, I mean, they're my thoughts, and I'm sure that people aren't going to be, warm to those, but hey.
Yeah, well, in many ways, it makes sense that the government doesn't really look favorably on a movement that takes kids out of their own control. And so that kind of segues into my next question, which was about the political climate. Like, have you seen concerning changes and trends within the way that the government legislates and regulates homeschooling?
I To be fair, yeah, I think they're being a little bit more conducive to it. So I think they're being a little bit more warmer to understanding that this is a parental right as much as an essential freedom. So yeah, I think they're working. I mean, NASA, to give NASA credit, even though I've got criticisms of them, they were the Board of Studies in New South Wales. They've done really, really well at trying to empower people to homeschool well. Their homeschooling department, I think, is probably second to none in the country. They've done extremely well at trying to accommodate for parents who homeschool, and without going the full hog and advocating it and saying that you should be doing this. They said, "Look, if you're going to do it, this is the way we think it should be done, and these are the advice that we suggest." And I think that's, to be fair to them, that's good. But yeah, I'm still cynical of bureaucrats because as we saw, I mean, a few years back, the Greens took the lead in doing this investigation into homeschooling, and they were able to trigger that on the basis that their theory is that homeschooling is child abuse. Well, they got a bit of egg on their faces when they came out. When they did finish the investigation, homeschool kids were doing well. There were gaps, but that's no different to their, the gaps in the system they have themselves, where kids fall through. We're not talking about one or two kids. We're talking about heaps of kids. I mean, the education system, to me, again, people probably might not like it, is very much like Lord of the Flies. Parents dump their kids off on an island, basically, and then they're let to run wild themselves. You can't trust that the teachers are actually going to be there doing their job. Okay, there's a lot of good teachers out there. I'm not trying to put any of those guys down. I had great teachers, and they provided stability in my life when I needed it. I've already acknowledged that. But the line between the teacher having the authority of a parent or the role and responsibility of a parent can't be crossed. Once we cross that, the government is dad, the government is mum, and where are we then as a society?
Yep. No, that's really good. I think just before I let you go, is there any advice that you would give to parents who either might be looking at homeschooling or are maybe starting that journey?
Ask questions. Don't write it off completely. Seek out others who homeschool. Look at their example and decide. For Christians who are entering into that arena, I'd say pray and pray hard. Really, is this where the Lord's leading you? And if that's the case, then great. I would say the Lord leads us in that direction as parents anyway, whether you send your kids to school or formal schooling or whether you home educate them. I think that your role as a parent is educator. In fact, a theologian and very flawed man in his own private life, Karl Barth, he talks about honoring your parents and what that means. He said the first commandment to have God and no other gods before you holds back the commandment or restrains the commandment on your parents, on your mother and your father. And he said the meaning of honoring your mother and father isn't to deify them and elevate them to a godlike status, but to understand that they are your teachers. They are facilitating your education, much like they would a master to an apprentice. And how the parent does that, how mum or dad does that, is going to define or determine that child's outlook on life, that child's well-being. And I'm speaking from experience who come from parents who abdicated their responsibility and said, "You're the world's problem, not mine. Just don't do anything wrong." Well, when I got to start to set what's right and wrong, I wasn't told. I knew there were laws that we had to obey. So yeah, pray, think, ask questions, and don't let the hearsay on the myths drag you down. I mean, I think that homeschooling is, there's plenty of evidence for that. I wrote 4 articles for Dads for Kids, which went up on Canberra Declaration, and worked with Warwick Marsh on those. And we came up with some, I think some fair points that are well researched and fact checked. And you see even today contemporary examples of successful homeschoolers out there, athletes and musicians, movie stars, excuse me, and a few others make up a good percentage of those. But there are others as well. I mean, the point is that parents are involved in the education of their kids, and that's why I'm fully supportive of someone like Ron DeSantis, who is bringing all these parental rights things in to sort of bring back the role of education and the responsibility of educating children into the hands of parents, so that they have a say, they have an input. And you know what? That releases the pressure off teachers who aren't having to discipline children like a parent would, because parents are actively involved. So the parents are working with teachers, and the teachers then take a subsidiary role, not a substitutionary role. Very much like what the government is doing at the moment in Australia. They're doing a subsidiary role, but the danger there is it becomes substitutionary through the woke ideology and other things that hammering all of us in society to conform to new cultural laws that many of us oppose.
Yeah, no, that's really encouraging, and it's really a good note to end on. That there is hope that homeschooling is a legitimate and really the beneficial way to go about education. So I really appreciate your wisdom today, Rod, and thanks for joining me.
Yes, Cody.